Hello everyone, Mr. Quality Guy here, and today's video we're going to look down at the Gage R&R portion of MSA, and we're going to try to understand what that means. So first off, what is Gage R&R? So Gage R&R is a process within the MSA sort of deal that tells us, is this gauge good enough to use? So how do we do that? Well, first we need to understand basically how to do a Gage R&R. A Gage R&R basically is a set of trials that you use with a gauge to determine if it's good, enough for measurement. And we have a couple of thresholds that we need to understand. So in our Gage R&R process, anything under 10% variation, that is a good gauge. Then when we get into that 10 to 30%, we understand that the gauges might be acceptable for measurement, but if it's fiscally viable to improve it, that we should improve it. If it's not fiscally viable, then we don't necessarily need to. And then everything over 30 means that that tool is not the proper tool to measure with. So what can we do Gage R&Rs with? Well, Gage R&Rs we can do with pretty much any tool except CNC controlled tools. Now this is kind of important because you can use a CNC controlled tool such as a CMM to perform a Gage R&R, but you're not using it as the tool that is being in that Gage R&R. So for example, if I have a fixture that contains a part on it, I would be doing a Gage R&R on that fixture using the CMM as the measuring device, not the CMM itself. That is kind of important to understand in that variation. But what is a Gage R&R? So a Gage R&R is a set of trials, basically in multiple different configurations, but generally you'll see a 3-3-10, which is 3 operators, 3 parts, 10 trials, or you'll see 3-10-3 with 3 operators, 10 parts, 3 trials. That is your typical configuration in that way. But what if you don't have 3 operators? Well, there's a couple other different variations. You can have a Gage R, which a Gage R would be 2 operators, 2 parts, 10 trials, or 2 operators, 2 parts, 10 trials. Like I said, there's those couple of variations in there. So, why are Gage R&Rs important? Well, it tells us if that our fixturing and the tools that we're using to measure are acceptable. If we're using unacceptable tools or gauges to measure, we'll never get good, consistent results. Or we could have issues with part variation that could be outside of our control, such as using a bad fixture. A bad fixture will never give us good control over that part and will never give us good data. See, the key in quality is collecting good data. So, if you have any other questions on Gage R&Rs or anything in that measurement system analysis process, don't hesitate to comment down below, and we'll see if we can do a video on that. So, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you again next time.